Hello and welcome to Discover History's YouTube channel. Hopefully you've subscribed, so make sure you click subscribe and then you won't miss any of the videos. And as we've been saying for most of this week, we're almost up to our 100th video, so please let us know what you would like to see for our 100th video. Anyway, today we're going to continue the theme of early history. In other words, if you look at what we actually cover for living history, school workshops and whatever, we cover every age from the Stone Age all the way up to really the 1950s, almost, yeah, I could say it. We're also doing a bit of 1960s as well, as you can have a look from our website at www.discover-history.co.uk. Brand new website, by the way. It's just been updated by Helen, which is one of the reasons why she hasn't been around so much lately. However, that's the earliest part of our history. So today our topic is on the old stuff that we do. And in a way it continues from where we left off. If you remember on the video on Saturday, I took a look at flint tools and I showed you, for example, a hand axe, and I also showed you one of the flint cores where you take individual blades as flakes and they can be used in all manner of things, from skinning to being used set in a piece of antler, for example, to be used as a scythe. Now we also celebrate these 2 weeks, the fortnight that we're in at the moment, as Farming Fortnight. I don't know if anyone's a fan of BBC Countryfile, for example. They were talking about it last week and I'm sure they'll be talking about it tonight. We must remember to celebrate the farmers in society. At the end of the day, especially during COVID-19, they are also key workers, people that are out there farming to bring our food and to bring the food into the supermarkets or into the farm shops and then eventually bring it into our cupboard. So they are really, really important people. Farming is an important business, an important trade as such. So we're going to mix it with talking about early history, talking about Stone Age people, prehistory, and we're also going to mix it with Farming Fortnight. So what are we talking about? Early farming. So around about 4000 BC, farming actually came to Europe, and it eventually sort of moved across into Britain specifically, and then it spread across the land. It wasn't a natural thing to do to start with. You have to remember, early people living back in prehistory were very used to living a nomadic lifestyle. In other words, wandering about, literally like the Native American people, following the herds of reindeer, the bison, the moose, for example, the wild boar, all these animals, interesting animals that we once had in Britain. A lot of them have disappeared, sadly, a lot of them due to climate change, like the woolly mammoth, or due to overkilling of them, like wild boar. Saying that, we have introduced back into Britain now wild boar, very, very large amounts of them in the Forest of Dean, not too far away in Gloucestershire. And we also have herds of reindeer, or one herd at the moment, as far as I'm aware, living in the Cairngorms of reindeer. So we're slowly reintroducing some of the animals that were thought to be lost. So people years ago, so if we talk about the Paleolithic and Mesolithic simply, these people were hunter-gatherers, so they followed these animals and they hunted them, and they stayed pretty close to these herds, so they would always have food available when they needed it. And obviously part of their lifestyle is this gathering aspect, where they would actually find plants, mushrooms, take eggs, for example, at a nest, and find the nuts and berries and fruit, very much like the animals are looking for as well. So that was the hunter-gatherer way, but there were problems with living like that. One is you move around a lot, so it's quite exhaustive work, to be fair. It's also very difficult because sometimes you may lose contact with the animals, or they may be further away than you expected them. If there's any diseases, it could kill off animals or even the plants that you're eating. And the other biggest thing is what happens, especially in gathering, if you choose the wrong mushroom or the wrong berry, for example, it's going to kill you, obviously. And that's one of the reasons why when we talk about Stone Age people in hunting and gathering, we always emphasize the fact that please do not pick things if you don't know what they are. Very, very serious thing. There's a lot of things out there that can easily kill you or injure you, to the point where you have organ failure. It doesn't kill you, but you could get organ failure from it and long-term problems. So please be careful. We always advise not to go out gathering as such. So eventually, about 4000 BC, we switch from this hunter-gatherer lifestyle to what is often referred to as farming, which is an easier, supposedly, and safer, supposedly, pastime. In other words, the culture is now farming, not hunting and gathering. I say that in its loosest terms, that it's safer and easier, purely because if you compare it with following animals, tracking animals, killing animals, especially the big animals like woolly mammoth, it is difficult and it is dangerous. And even gathering plants and berries and that is a dangerous activity. As I said, it could kill you or cause major problems with your health. So we switched to farming. It may have come from Syria, they assume. It may have come from somewhere far away, but it eventually came to Britain, probably by people that came here in boats, for example, way back in the Mesolithic. But it really took hold in what is referred to as the Neolithic, and then very much so in the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, right up to the present day. It's the way we live today. Now, the tools in the archaeological record tells us and shows us what they were using when we switched from hunting and gathering to this new lifestyle of farming. And there are lots of very good books. This is a favourite of mine, quite an old book of mine now, which is Man the Toolmaker, and there are some fantastic archaeological illustrations in here, including all sorts of things like hand axes and flint cores and blades, for example. You can see them beautifully illustrated there. And when we switch to farming, our tool collection increases. Obviously, we have a lot more things that we require, and this book shows some of those tools that I'm going to talk about next. Now, I could always bring in pictures, I can always show you books, I can always have a look on Google. However, that is not the way Discover History works. We like to have props, and trust me, our store contains all sorts of things. Plates through history, lighting through history, spoons through history, pens through history, and you've seen a few of those props, authentic props, in past videos. Remember the one we did on pens, for example. So today I've got some very early farming implements, things that would have been around in the Neolithic, things that would definitely be around in the Bronze Age, when farming is now the new way of life. The old hunter and gathering lifestyle is something of the past. Not completely, however. So, what is the first tool that would have been used by our early farmers? Well, probably the first one, the most useful one, would have been this, and this is actually a flint axe. Now, if you remember what I talked about in the video on Saturday, I mentioned a hand axe, and what I have to say is that's more of a cleaver, something for chopping meat and breaking open nuts, whereas this is what you would think of when I say the word axe. This is an axe that would have appeared in the Stone Age, right at the very end of the Stone Age, and continued through into the Bronze Age to a certain degree. And it's a very useful tool for felling a tree. And what you have to remember is in the Stone Age there was more trees around. This country became quite forested. There was a lot of trees, a lot of woods. And what early man wanted to do is clear an area so they could live. And they took flint, as we mentioned yesterday, knapped flint, and they attached it to a piece of wood. We have some cordage on here. It's also been glued into place using tree sap, and it makes a very good tool for taking down a tree, and it does work. I have actually used this. not to bring down a tree, but I have chopped wood with it. It's absolutely fantastic tool, and it can be retouched later on to sharpen it up. This is probably the first tool they were using, because you can't farm in the middle of a forest. You need to be able to clear land. The other interesting thing is, by the Neolithic, we were going from living in nothing more than a tent, shall we say, really. We used to make tents out of animal skins, held up by woolly mammoth bone and held down by antler and all sorts of things, really. And if you go right back, obviously famously the Stone Age people also lived in caves, but we're talking really in the Paleolithic, right back in the mist of time. But really we start building houses, and to build a house, especially out of timber, you do need those trees that are around. So as you're clearing the land to make your new houses, round houses by the way, you're also clearing that forest land of the trees that you're using, but also allowing you space to actually carry out farming. So it's killing a bird with one stone, or killing two birds with one stone. If you want to have a look at some reconstructed roundhouses from this period, there are some at Stonehenge, which is worth a visit when lockdown opens all these places again. So it's worth having a look at a reconstructed Neolithic village. So this is the axe, a true axe as we would think of them, really. Prehistoric people also needed to clear that land that they've cleared of trees, and if you think about farming, if you're not using things like axes or chainsaws in the modern term, you also need shovels, spades and pickaxes, for example. And in the Stone Age, in the Neolithic and definitely into the Bronze Age, they were using things like this. This is my shovel, this is my spade, this is my in a way mattock, really, and this is made out of a shoulder bone, a scapula, and this comes from an animal. So you've probably eaten the animal, you've also taken the skin, you've also drank the blood, you've made use of the ligaments, for example, to make sinew into cordage. You've made use of everything, and this makes a fantastic mattock. It makes a fantastic shovel for moving earth, and also a spade. And these have been found in the prehistoric record, possibly as they are, or maybe even mounted on a branch. And this will help clear the ground ready for your true farming. You've taken the trees, you're building the houses, clearing the land. Now you're altering the earth, you're digging through the earth. If you find there are pebbles in the way, or huge stones, we have an antler as a pick, and that was used for taking out the big pebbles. These have been found, by the way, at Grimes graves, because that famously is where they often mined flint straight out of the ground, not taking surface flint, but finding the finest flint from down in the depth of the earth. So this is a pick, a prehistoric pick. And then eventually you would think about growing crops and bringing animals together to keep them in pens. Animals like wild goats and wild sheep, or even wild boar, you pen an area, herd them into it, make sure it's secure, and then when you're hungry, instead of following these animals, they're on your back doorstep in your newfangled roundhouse. And then if you found some very good root vegetables, or maybe best fruit and veg and that sort of thing, then you take bits of them, you take a seedling, for example, and you plant them by your back door. This is farming. This is going from hunting and gathering into farming. So therefore you need very simple tools like a digging stick. This can be used to dig the hole to put the plants in. That item was used for years to actually dig plants out as well, or vegetables out. And then what you have to remember is around about 4000 BC, when farming starts, we're also growing crops, true crops, and things like barley starts to appear. And when it's all growing, like it is at the moment, you will eventually have to harvest it, which was a very tough job years ago. And if you remember, I mentioned how they took blades and fitted them into antler. I have here an amazing curved bit of wood, not antler in this case, so a curved bit of wood, and then we've taken our flakes from our core, and these are actually stuck into position using tree sap. And this makes a fantastic sickle to cut down those barley sheaths, for example, which can then be used to make things like bread. And obviously, because you're creating so much, the Neolithic is also the era where you need clay pots. What are they for? To store the new things that you're farming with. Hunter-gatherers don't really need pots. They move around, they eat whenever they want, they graze like an animal. So I think it's absolutely fantastic. Farming has come a very, very long way, from these early agricultural tools up to modern harvesters, the combine harvesters, huge machines that are now used on farms. So on that note, please remember to praise the farmer. It is, after all, a very important fortnight, farming fortnight. These people are key people from society, and they're the ones that bring our food. Anyway, on that note, we'll see you soon. Bye.